Honor, I was doing good out there. I was not selling drugs. I wasn't doing none of that. I wasn't. I was trying to get my life on track, man. Your Honor, I'm sorry. Please don't sentence me to 13 years. Your Honor, please don't.
It's justice because I gave you more opportunities. I'm talking right now. Oh, you don't, do you? This is how you behave. You deserve every month that you get.
This is convicted drug lord Jose Gouveia Jimenez. Police say that Jimenez was working with a Mexican cartel to operate a heroin trafficking operation that brought as much as 100 kilos of the drug into Columbus every month. The investigation resulted in the seizure of 25 kilos of heroin, which was worth a whopping $2.5 million. Jimenez pleaded guilty to 2 counts of trafficking, along with 1 count of engaging in a corrupt activity, and is appearing at the Franklin County Courthouse today for sentencing. Far from the heights of his glory days as the ringleader of a Columbus drug operation, Jimenez shuffles into the courtroom wearing khaki prison-issued scrubs. However, he hasn't completely lost his sense of steely command, as he shoots a quick, icy stare at the narcotics investigators who are in court to see their hard work come to fruition. Assistant Prosecutor Dan Stanley begins the hearing by making Jimenez's high-ranking position within the operation abundantly clear.
This is the ringleader of an organization that is so fear-inspiring that the people who come here from Mexico refuse to testify against it because they know as soon as they are born, their family will be murdered in Mexico.
He also speaks of the fear-inducing power of the cartel and the difficulties this poses when trying to obtain convictions against gang members. All the while, Jimenez maintains his stance, standing bolt upright while glaring into the distance. A female witness, who's not shown on camera to protect her identity, gives evidence to the court about how she helped Jimenez to store and move heroin in the Columbus area.
He was bringing me the drugs to my house.
What kind of drugs?
Heroin.
How much?
1 kilo, and the last time 2 kilos.
Watch Jimenez as she testifies. You'd be forgiven for thinking he was a statue, but if you look closely, you'll see that he does in fact blink. The ringleader has been stone cold up until now, and his lack of remorse is about to get clearer as he addresses the court through an interpreter.
This has been overblown,
Y pido perdón por lo que yo he hecho.
and I apologize.
Jimenez stands and expresses some form of apology curtly in Spanish, looking as if he's choking on every word. His translator manages to make his words sound more human in English. However, Judge Kimberly Cockcroft isn't buying any of his feeble regret, and she takes him to task on his claims that his accountability has been inflated by the prosecution team.
I'm surprised to hear you say today that your participation is overblown.
The judge reminds him sharply that she informed him of his statutory requirements for a conviction before jailing Jimenez for 21 years in prison. She also orders that the drug baron be deported immediately upon discharge.
I was very intentional about explaining to you the statutory requirement for conviction.
Jimenez shows no reaction to the fact that he will be approaching 70 when he's released, and instead just saunters from the courtroom with an expression of disdain on his face. Jimenez's total lack of emotion is unnerving, and as we see in the next case, Dexter Lee Williams shows a similar level of catatonic coldness. However, in Williams' case, someone else is getting worked up on his behalf.
We talking about from me, Judge? You holding what I said against my client?
I'm talking to Mr. Williams. I've heard everything.
Right, but you're holding, no, what other accusations? He didn't testify, so you're holding what I said.
I've heard everybody.
The 53-year-old kingpin is just about to be sentenced at Houston County Superior Court after being convicted on 3 counts of violating the Racketeer and Corrupt Organizations Act. The conviction stems from drug trafficking charges brought against Williams, who police said was leading a multi-million-dollar trafficking operation between Mexico and Atlanta. When taken into custody, he had 39 kilos of cocaine in his possession, worth an estimated $3.5 million. Here he is talking and laughing to himself in the back of the police car following his arrest.
Son of a bitch, they thought me had pass. I should have never walked into that fucking house.
Sentencing Williams is Judge Bo Adams, and he has some strong words for the defendant, who sits impassively in his seat.
In your case, it's not a
a mere possession case. It's not a mere struggle that you have with an addiction that you personally have. It is not that. You are, I would say, you are feeding the addiction that they're battling with, and you are profiting from their addiction.
While Williams might be unmoved by Judge Adams, his defense attorney, Wanda Jackson, is growing noticeably agitated by the judge's words, and she sighs and leans back irritably in her seat.
You were convicted not because the court is underhanded or corrupted or is corrupt or anything like that.
And it seems that the penny finally drops for the defendant that the sentencing is not going well for him. He shares a look with Wanda Jackson, and what happens next is something you don't see too often in a sentencing hearing. Williams continues to stare on without emotion. Wanda Jackson has heard enough, and incredibly takes issue with Judge Adams.
Are we talking about from me, Judge? You're holding what I said against my client?
I'm talking to Mr. Williams. I've heard everything.
Right, but you're holding, no, what other accusations? He didn't testify, so you're holding what I said.
I've heard everybody. I've heard it all.
Who else said
I've heard it all. I've heard it all. It's my time.
She attempts to scold him for insinuating that her defense case was filled with wild accusations. But the judge cuts her off and goes on with his speech.
Mr. Williams, you're convicted not because I'm corrupt or underhanded, or law enforcement is racist, or the jury had unauthorized contact with witnesses. You're convicted because you're guilty. That's the plain and simple truth of it. The evidence showed that, the wiretaps show that, and at the end of it all, I find that I would say you should be sentenced for your involvement, your participation in this racketeering enterprise, and your acquiring significant sums of money.
Jackson, however, remains unimpressed and can be seen gesturing with her hands and huffing. Judge Adams ultimately sentences Williams to a total of 40 years without parole, and even the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison isn't enough to stir a reaction from the stone-cold dealer.
And at the end of it all, for count one, I will sentence Mr. Williams to 20 years to serve. Count two, I will sentence him to 20 years. And that will be consecutive to count one, and I'm going to require that be served. 20 years to serve. Count three, I already indicated that is merged with count one. So that'll be the sentence of the court.
Jackson is less than pleased, though, and she gathers her things and stands to leave before the judge has a chance to finish speaking.
So that'll be the sentence of the court as a result of...
Thank you, may be excused.
All right.
For Williams, it was the allure of power and money that drew him to trafficking. But as we see in the case of Wallace Bigger, not all dealers live a lavish lifestyle.
I believe the judge is biased, and I said from the start, Andrew Tommy would not give me a fair trial.
Police say that Bigger moved a significant pipeline of prescription drugs through Antrim County in northern Michigan over the course of a number of years. The operation involved obtaining thousands of morphine pills and other controlled medications from a doctor in Saginaw, which were then sold by Bigger from a number of locations across the county. However, despite bringing in more than $20,000 from the spoils of his illegal trade, Bigger barely got by, living in practical squalor in a camper van on his daughter's driveway. Throughout his trial, the 71-year-old remained defiant, protesting his innocence and berating his legal counsel and the criminal justice system as a whole. He tried to fire his lawyer on a number of occasions and claimed that he was framed by law enforcement officials. He was eventually convicted of conducting a criminal enterprise, the most serious charge possible under Michigan's racketeering laws. Today, Bigger is appearing before Judge Philip Rogers for sentencing. The judge doesn't hold back as he lays out the elderly drug lord's trashy living conditions and resentful nature.
Did you live a big lifestyle? Were you sitting out next to the cement pond with the BMW parked in the driveway? No, you weren't. You lived a pretty crummy lifestyle, time to time, a camper in your daughter's front driveway, but it didn't stop you from being manipulative. It didn't stop you from abusing other people.
Bigger is less than pleased, and when he approaches the podium to speak, what he has to say shocks the court.
I did not sell drugs, and I will not admit to nothing.
Maintaining his brazen pretense, the drug dealer continues to feign innocence. He then goes on to complain bitterly about his lawyer and even goes as far as to accuse Judge Rogers of being biased, repeating his claim that he did not get a fair trial.
I believe the judge is biased, and as I said right from the start, Andrew Tony would not give me a fair trial. And I did not get a fair trial. And I got a screwy lawyer.
The prosecution team disregards his dubious claims, arguing that he was the main pill dealer in Antrim County as they appeal to the judge for the harshest sentence possible. They want to use Wallace Bigger to set an example for any other would-be dealers.
He was the primary provider of morphine during that time period within Antrim County. He kept going back to Saginaw and was getting 800 pills a month, bringing them back here. Hopefully his sentencing at the high end of the guidelines and the consecutive nature will send a message to anybody that may want to fill that vacuum that regardless of your age, there is a consequence if you are caught trafficking this quantity of controlled substance.
Judge Rogers ultimately sentences Bigger to a minimum of 20 years in total, meaning he will likely never see the light of day again.
I am sentencing you to 180 to 360 months on charge number 1. On charge 2, the controlled substance delivery charge, 23 to 240 months. Charges 3 and 4, 23 to 240 months. On the maintaining a drug house, 16 to 24 months. And on conducting the criminal enterprise, that's 50 to 240 months.
Most drug lords like Bigger are convicted for possessing illegal substances with the intent to distribute, and rarely face any charges in relation to the effect that their drugs have on their vulnerable customers. However, occasionally, dealers are held to account for the consequences of their actions, and one such case is Aaron Andrade. The 25-year-old drug dealer is in court today for sentencing after admitting his part in the overdose death of 29-year-old Kristen Kutu. Kutu had left a drug treatment facility just 2 days before her death because her insurance wouldn't cover more than 30 days of inpatient treatment. On the day she died, she arranged to buy drugs from Andrade, but unknown to her, the heroin the dealer gave her was laced with a fatal dose of fentanyl.
The Attorney General says it's the first time a drug dealer has been convicted of murder of someone who overdosed, a landmark case with many implications for how the state will prosecute dealers.
Andrade pleaded no contest to second-degree murder in relation to Kutu's death in a plea agreement that saw 2 further drug charges against him dismissed. At sentencing, Judge Kristen Rogers hears submissions from the prosecution on the nature of the evidence they held against Andrade.
The state would have proven that what the defendant really sold Kristen Kutu was nearly pure fentanyl, a controlled substance like heroin or morphine, hundreds of times more toxic than heroin.
She asks the defendant if the facts of the case are true, and he admits that they are.
Are all of these facts true?
Yes, ma'am.
Kristen Kutu's mother then gives an emotional impact statement, recalling the horror of being told her daughter overdosed.
2 Cranston police officers standing there. All I could say repeatedly was, "Please don't tell me my daughter is dead. Please don't tell me my daughter is dead."
Family members look on in the public gallery, weeping, and Kristen's mom even has to stop at one stage so that a grieving relative can leave the room.
Sorry, it's okay. It's okay.
Following the impact statements, Andrade stands to speak, and what he says surprises the court.
I know I heard a lot of people, including her family and my family, because we're all going through this.
Unlike most convicts, Andrade takes full responsibility for what he has done, expressing remorse and a clear understanding that his actions have caused untold grief for the Kutu family. However, Andrade's repentant words can't save him, and Judge Rogers hands him 40 years with 20 to serve.
Your Honor, this defendant stands before you indicted on, among others, the count of murder for, as the state alleges, delivering a substance containing fentanyl which killed Kristen Kutu.
The remorseful dealer shows no visible reaction to the sentence as he calmly accepts his fate. While truly genuine remorse like Andrade's might be an unusual occurrence in the courtroom, most defendants will try to appear at least a little bit contrite when put before a judge. However, a small few, like Charles Crosby, are so cold and unapologetic that even a significant prison sentence doesn't knock a stir out of them. Crosby is in Clement County Court for sentencing on drug trafficking and corruption charges. The 35-year-old was found guilty on 12 counts after being caught in possession of $5,000 worth of heroin and cocaine that was intended for the streets of New Richmond. Crosby has a long criminal history spanning back to the age of 14, and police say that he set up his dealing empire just 4 months after being released from a previous prison stint for trafficking heroin. The hearing kicks off with Assistant Prosecutor Darren Miller trying to impress on Judge Thomas Herman the extent of the damage done to the community by Crosby.
Heroin is bad enough, but laced with fentanyl, it becomes a game of Russian roulette. And individuals like Charles Crosby provide the weapon, they provide the bullet, and they spin the chamber, pointing at the addict's head, and all the addict has to do is pull the trigger. That's who Charles Crosby is. Officials say that while the defendant was active, overdoses and drug-related deaths spiraled due to large amounts of fentanyl-laced heroin on the streets. Crosby's drug-dealing antics are scandalous enough, but when Police Chief Randy Harvey tells the court how he forced addicts to sell his products, the court is stunned by what he has to say.
They would have black eyes or their face would be swollen, and I would ask them, how did this occur? And they would frankly tell me that Charles Crosby and his associates would beat them.
You heard right. Crosby would feed the addictions of his customers and then beat them senseless until they agreed to sell drugs on the streets for him. Crosby seemingly couldn't care less about his horrific actions being laid bare to the court and simply rolls his eyes as Harvey speaks. The defendant continues to stare vacantly as Judge Herman lists off his lengthy criminal record before sentencing him to 20 years and 9 months in prison. True to form, Crosby doesn't even flinch as the weighty sentence is handed down. Thankfully for New Richmond residents, their town will now be safer for a long time to come. While many kingpins like Crosby prefer the ultimate power and glory of working alone, a small few choose to tag team their responsibilities. And as we see in the next case, some even choose to make it a family business. This is Rashad Johnson, and this is his brother Marquez Johnson. The Jacksonville siblings are appearing before Duval County Judge R. Anthony Salem for sentencing after being tried together and convicted of drug trafficking and possession charges. Their arrests came after police raided a trap house on the east side of Jacksonville, and the charges they were convicted of had drug enhancements because both men were identified as leaders of the ruthless 1200 Out East gang. Watch the brotherly love as Marquez shoots Rashad a nod of acknowledgement. Prior to sentencing, members of the Johnson family file into the witness box to plead for leniency, telling the judge that the men have 7 kids between them.
I often think about the things I could have done different as a parent. I know my sons could have had a better outcome in life.
And he's a family man?
He is.
And do you feel he's a good father? Or not?
He's a great father. Your Honor, I pray and ask that you're merciful. I pray that there's some resources to help them grow.
Then the brothers take it in turns to address the judge.
I don't know what kind of sentence you will hand out today, but I would ask that you be lenient towards me. I have a beautiful family, which includes 4 kids and a stepchild. I am not a bad person. I'm not a monster. I'm not a gamer. Just a human being who made mistakes.
Rashad throws himself at the mercy of Judge Salem, claiming to simply be a man who has made mistakes. In a similar vein, Marquez denies any involvement in gang activity.
I'm not labeled as a menace, an animal, or a gang member or in my community or anywhere else. And I just want to say I'm sorry to my family once again for putting me through this situation and letting them down.
Prosecutors aren't buying it, and they argue that the Johnson brothers had plenty of opportunity to clean up their act, but continued to engage in gang-related activities.
They had the opportunity to better their lives after serving 3 years in the Florida State Prison, and they came back out and continued doing the same pattern of criminal activity that they'd been arrested so many times before for. They even moved out of their community. But instead of staying out of their community and getting jobs, the court has heard nothing from any of these witnesses about legal jobs that they had. They provided for their families financially, but how are they doing that? By selling drugs.
The men stand side by side to hear their fate, and with the futures of 2 men hanging in the balance, it seems like Judge Salem has a heavy decision to make. The sentence he hands down stuns the courtroom.
You're adjudicated guilty, sentenced to 30 years Florida State Prison, with 581 days credit.
Loud sobs echo through the public gallery from the men's supporters as a hefty 30-year sentence is imposed on both brothers. As upset as the men's family members may be, the brothers seem to be taking their 3-decade punishment in stride, as Rashad turns and waves goodbye to his family without a trace of sadness as he is led from the courtroom. The Johnson brothers' sentences may seem heavy to some, but they're nothing compared to the punishment that Robert Lloyd Shellenberg faced when he was caught trafficking drugs in China. According to state prosecutors in China, Shellenberg attempted to smuggle 222 kilograms of methamphetamine from Dalian, which is a city in the Liaoning province, to Australia. When the Canadian man realized that his translator had informed Chinese police he was transporting drugs, he fled and boarded a plane to Thailand, but was later arrested when the plane had a stopover at an airport in the Guangdong province. Despite claiming that he was just an innocent tourist who was unfortunately set up by a drug dealer, Shellenberg was tried and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He later appealed and was granted a retrial, which took place a few months later. We see him here during his second trial, in a different angle to the first trial, where he faced accessory criminal charges. The prosecution seem to be going for broke now and are maintaining that Shellenberg played a crucial and important role in the trafficking. It may have been poor timing on his part, as the retrial took place just 1 month after Canadian authorities arrested Meng Wanzhou, the chief financial officer of Huawei, on charges of bank fraud in Canada. Chinese authorities were not happy with this arrest, and it seems they are now scapegoating Shellenberg in a game of diplomatic tit-for-tat. Shellenberg is again found guilty, and as his sentence is read out, he probably wishes that he had served out his 15 years and kept his mouth shut. Presiding Judge Qiu Chunhua is pulling no punches as she sentences Shellenberg to death. Yes, death.
罗伯特·劳埃德、谢伦伯格犯走私毒品罪，判处死刑。
In an unusual move which is suspected to be a veiled message to Canadian authorities, the sentencing is broadcast across Chinese state media. Shellenberg gestures and looks devastated as he realizes what the judge has just said. His utter bewilderment is clear from the expression on his face as he tries to come to terms with his punishment. International speculation is that the judge gave a capital sentence to put pressure on Canada to release Meng Wanzhou. Shellenberg later appeals the death sentence, but his application is rejected by the court. Wanzhou, on the other hand, is later released and allowed to travel back to China. As of 2023, Shellenberg remains in a Chinese prison facing death. Harsh sentences like Shellenberg's are not unheard of in Asian countries, and nobody knows this better than Felix Dorin. The 35-year-old French man was convicted of trafficking 3 kilos of various drugs into Indonesia after being caught on Lombok Airport with a suitcase filled with ecstasy and amphetamines. He later escaped and was on the run for 2 weeks before being recaptured. Indonesia is known to have some of the strictest drug laws in the world, and although the amount of drugs Dorin was carrying was relatively small, he still faces a severe punishment. During his trial, prosecutors asked for a 20-year jail sentence, along with a $700,000 fine. It's a hefty sentence, but Dorin is likely reassured that they're not pursuing the death penalty. He sits calmly with his lawyer as the judge begins to give their ruling. However, his relief is about to be short-lived. Unfortunately for Dorin, Indonesian judges are known to sometimes exceed the prosecutor's demands, and in this case, presiding judge Isnurul Siamsul is in a particularly acrimonious mood. He brings the gavel down sharply as he hands Dorin a death sentence. Dorin's eyes drop as the reality of what the judge has said sinks in. He then appears to say something angrily to his lawyer before standing up and leaving the courtroom looking devastated. He later appeals the ruling, and luckily, his capital sentence is commuted to 19 years in prison. Although the harshest of sentences for drug-related offenses are normally handed down outside of the Western world, there have been exceptions to this rule over the years. Take, for example, Jeff Mzansi. In 1996, Mzansi was caught by police as he tried to sell 3 kilograms of marijuana to a dealer connected to Mexican drug cartels. Unluckily for the Missouri man, he already had 2 previous drug-related offenses dating back over a decade. This meant that under a Missouri law for persistent drug offenders, a sentence of life with no parole was allowed. Despite the fact that Jeff's record was non-violent, incredibly, Jeff began his life sentence in the same year that California legalized marijuana for medical use. Over the years, Jeff and his family campaigned for clemency, even raising almost 400,000 signatures on a Change.org petition. But their efforts are fruitless, and Jeff remains incarcerated. However, he gives regular interviews from behind bars, expressing his opinion that he was unfairly treated and deserves a second chance.
Justice is supposed to be fair and equal. In my case, I don't think it was.
After more than 20 years in prison for nothing more than possession of marijuana, Jeff has spent a third of his life behind bars, and he becomes emotional as he reflects on the more important things he has missed out on over that time.
found that out about a month ago. I got grandkids I've never seen.
The Mzansi family's years of lobbying and campaigning finally start to pay off, and in 2015, the issue was brought to the attention of Governor Jay Nixon when Mzansi appeals to the legislator through a local TV interview. What happens next is like a ray of light at the end of a very long tunnel for Jeff.
Do you even go there thinking about that moment where you'll get out?
Many times. Try not to, but yeah, I do. I dream about being able to grab my grandkid.
Governor Nixon promises to review the case before he leaves office.
The laws change after someone is sentenced, then you want to give those things a close look.
He stays true to his word and commutes Jeff's sentence, meaning he can argue for his freedom before a parole board. Watch the incredible moment that he walks free from prison after spending more than 2 decades in prison.
3 weeks ago, you said the first thing you wanted to do was get some new shoes. So how
and I got them. Wow. Hey, it's like walking on air.
He has spent the years since his release actively campaigning for the approval of medicinal cannabis. Another convict who knows the danger of repeat offending is Zier Duffy, though his offenses are much more serious than Mzansi's. However, in an interesting parallel, he's been given more chances than the pot dealer ever did.
They just made me look like a monster. The person they just made me out to be here, I'm scared of that person that they just tried to make me out to be. You heard I was doing good out there. I was not selling drugs. I wasn't doing none of that. I wasn't. I was trying to get my life on track, man.
Duffy has a record of drug-related offenses dating back 5 years, and he's been through the doors of the Lorain Municipal Court in Ohio so many times that Judge Raymond Ewers is plain tired of seeing him.
The 8 cases you had in this courtroom showed to me that you were a potential menace to society.
Judge Ewers has given him a number of chances, but Duffy is back in court today after being arrested for violating his parole, and it isn't for a minor misdemeanor. The 25-year-old led deputies on a high-speed car chase when they tried to arrest him on a separate warrant. When the chase finally ended, officers recovered large quantities of fentanyl and heroin, along with a Ruger SR-40 pistol. Unsurprisingly, Assistant Prosecutor Donna Freeman wants Duffy off the streets, and she's going for the jugular.
The state would ask that you sentence this defendant to the maximum amount of time allowed by law. He has been involved in a number of offenses involving guns, drug trafficking, high-speed chases with the police. He has no regard for society.
Duffy takes his opportunity to make one last appeal to the judge, and given his history of violent drug-related crime, you won't believe how he behaves.
They just made me look like a monster. The person they just made me out to be here, I'm scared of that person that they just tried to make me out to be. You heard I was doing good out there. I was not selling drugs. I wasn't doing none of that. I wasn't. I was trying to get my life on track, man. And this man just told me you're trying to give me 13 years.
In stark contrast to his mean reputation, the career criminal breaks down and weeps like a baby.
I'm not a monster. I'm not a monster.
In a performance that could almost be worthy of an Oscar nomination. Even Judge Ewers seems amused by the uncharacteristic outburst, though thankfully he isn't buying any of it.
You were driving that car the other day when the police were chasing you.
I was driving.
Well, I think I've had plenty of time to observe how you would behave after you left prison. I hung significant prison time over your head because the 8 cases you had in this courtroom showed to me that you were a potential menace to society.
The judge continues his rant, and it's clear that he's done with giving Duffy second chances.
I gave you an opportunity. I gave you more than one opportunity. I gave you more opportunities than maybe I should have.
As Duffy's lengthy sentence is read out, his drama performance turns to a show of utter disrespect, and he turns his back on the judge. The expression on his attorney's face says it all, and he shoots the defendant a warning look and a few quiet words, which Duffy duly ignores. Watch as he turns and stares straight into the court camera with intent, and no tears in sight. He swings back toward the bench with a question for the judge,
I'm just asking what's the total sentence, sir?
who brings down the full weight of the law on him with the maximum sentence possible.
The total sentence would be for 13 years and 4 months.
Incredibly, Duffy becomes belligerent and begins to argue about the sentence, even dropping the F-bomb on Judge Ewers.
So you just gave him 13 years.
13 years and 4 months.
After 3s, 4s, and 5s, though.
That's
How
right.
is this a justice system, right?
It's justice because I gave you more opportunities. I'm talking right now.
However, Ewers gets the parting shot as Duffy is led away.
There you go. So long, pal. I gave you more chances than anyone would ever give someone with 8 cases. This is how you behave. You deserve every month that you get.
The story doesn't end there for Duffy, though, and the 13 years he got was only in relation to his revoked parole. He's sentenced at a later date for the car chase and possession of the drugs and firearms, earning him a further 22.5 years in federal prison, where he'll have plenty of time to brush up on those acting skills.